What do you want to interview me on?
I'm going to set it up. Are you ready?
Oh, are you going for it?
Yeah, you ready?
Am I going to be able to answer?
Probably.
Only probably. That's ominous.
Right. Today, we're going to take a slightly different path. You were an early employee at Flaunt, right?
I was. Was I 9th or 10th, something like that?
I think you were single figures is how I would position it, because I can't remember the precise
Flaunt's number 9.
number. Yeah, something
I was
like
just
that,
about to
weren't
say
you?
Hurricane then, but I don't know if that's the proudest thing to talk about,
Put yourself against that, mate.
given his tournament.
So I want to get a better understanding. It's a bit of a selfish podcast, I think.
How dare you?
I'm almost data gathering,
All right.
but we've made a lot of changes. The company's grown. We've evolved. There's a couple of things that I want to throw at you, I think, on the table that I want to try and get your opinion on, because a lot of the time, whilst we try as much as we possibly can to include people in decision making, it's sometimes tricky to get honest feedback.
Yeah.
From my perspective. So all the changes that have happened around benefits I want to discuss.
All right.
And also I want to get your take on, me and Paul were talking about the other day, acting like a big agency before you are a big agency, to align mindset, to help increase opportunity and things like that. So I want to, with you being through the door, single figures, and now we're close to 40 people, there's a big difference in the size. We've tripled, so quadrupled, nearly.
Yeah.
So
Big change.
tripled. So first, let's start with because I think if we go into the benefits and the recollection that you have around what's changed for the better in terms of benefits that were perhaps in place when you started, which I can help you resurface, versus things that are in place now in terms of value from a culture perspective, and then the spin on mindset from when we sat down in terms of presenting ourselves versus where we are now, and the difference in confidence, I think. If we can steer that path.
Yeah. Let's do it.
So
you might have to remind me of things, yeah.
I mean, benefits that are often talked about are things like unlimited holidays was one. I think when you started.
Yeah, it was. So already I'm behind the curve here. Yeah. Yes, I do remember that.
So,
how long was that in place for?
Well, we sort of set that out when we employed Sam, who was number one.
Yeah.
And it stayed in place for quite a while, like at least the first 3 years, I would say.
Yeah, well, I joined in mid-2019, so it's 5 years. I've been here 5 years, so
it must have been longer, 4 or 5 years then.
Yeah, I remember it being in place maybe at least for my first year.
Yeah.
Although, when did COVID happen? Anyway, I don't know when.
2020, March 2020.
Right, yeah. Yeah, so I'd had between 6 and 9 months.
I think it was the January before COVID that we changed it,
Right, okay. All right, so I had like a 6-month runway of unlimited holiday before it changed.
Yeah.
Right. And now we don't have unlimited holiday.
We don't.
So yeah. So what do you want my feeling?
My sentiment on that was, it felt relevant when we set up, and it felt cool and trendy.
Yeah.
But in reality, it didn't work because what we found was people weren't using them. Yeah. At all.
That's quite a common theme when you when you see this narrative talked about on like. Do people even offer like unlimited?
I think there's companies that still do it. Yeah. I think the remote working thing has changed it slightly, but when we went from that to what we've got in place now, we also introduced a minimum.
Yeah, which I think is important, and also legal? Is it? Is
I
there
don't
a
think
law?
it's no. I don't think
Is it?
private companies have
Isn't
a.
it? So my take on that shift is, so unlimited holiday. You've fucking nailed it there. I think I remember when me and you were speaking before I'd accepted the job. Then I accepted the job. Then we're obviously, when you tell your circles outside of like family and friends, outside of work, well, I feel like it was a shiny thing to say quite early on in that conversation. Flaunt, talk about what we do, how big we are, how long they've been around, and then immediately talk about like the benefits, because you're talking to your trusted circle of friends and all that and family. I feel like one of the first things, a showy offy thing, and also people understand it. It's quite a you get holiday allowance. People, it's important to many people. So yeah, first shiny thing to shove in people's faces, and it's unlimited holiday, and people will be like, what does that mean? And then you'd be like, yeah, literally unlimited holiday with a like with the trust that it would be used sensibly, or whatever the word, conservatively or sensibly, or reasonably. So I think it was brought into conversations very early on when you're talking outwardly to other people, and people got it, and it was mostly, no, exclusively met with wow, positive, reaction, and that's probably why it came up in conversation so early when I was talking about it. But in reality, on an individual personal level, it didn't really make that much of a difference to me. I don't think of it as a shiny thing, but I appreciate where it sits in people's sort of experience with it. It's at that stage it was something to feel shiny and showy offy about. So I did that, but in reality, from my perspective, how it would impact me, very little. And now that I have been bedded into our current way of working holidays, which is a set allowance with a minimum, that to me is much easier to manage and navigate.
This is less stressful. I think when we
Yeah.
first did it, it was a well-being and a
Yeah.
recruitment play.
And I especially get the recruitment play, because listen to what I've just said about, I got the job, talking to friends and family about it, putting them in the picture, and very, very early putting them in the picture is, oh, and by the way, we get unlimited holiday. And people are like, what?
Yeah.
So yeah, get that. I think it was a nice thing to be able to, I'm going to say it again, show off about, or mention very early on. But in reality, not really much of a significant enough positive difference versus what we've got in place now on a personal level, and a set allowance works better for me.
Yeah, it's not practical, I think, and it causes booking paralysis, I think, is how I would describe it.
Doubts and things like that creeping from just a
And then you have
self-management.
the anomalies where we had one member of staff have, I think, nearly 3 months in a calendar year off.
I mean, that's remarkable, isn't it?
And that was...
But
it's there to be used.
Did you have any concerns about that as you were thinking about putting that in place?
Well, when you're on a growth trajectory and you're trying to grow a business, you want everybody that's sub 10, number 10, to think like an owner.
Yeah.
That wasn't. But it was there to be used. It was there as a benefit. So,
out of interest, did it quite quickly become apparent that it might be a hard one to manage?
No, because that's a edge case really in our experience of it. Like I say, the overwhelming feeling and use case was not enough people were using it, and not enough people were getting the rest that they needed. So that's why we ended up changing it.
Yeah. Personally, I'm better off with our current structure and what we changed to.
Good. The next, probably most significant thing, I'm hesitant to call it a benefit, but the value share scheme is probably the most significant in terms of impact.
Yeah.
I think things that we rolled out, and this is an interesting one for me because probably I don't know whether people know or not, but sales function here is not commission based. Yet there's a bonus scheme, which is called, we call it the value share scheme because of how it's structured. The company succeeds, everybody succeeds, more senior people have different tiers and stuff.
Yeah.
And I think it's interesting to me as a non-commission based salesperson, which I would estimate in the UK is probably sub
Minority.
0.5% of people.
Minority. Big minority.
What your thoughts were at the time, or did it even register? Or at that point, had you been here long enough to think it's almost a normality for Flaunt to be continuing to deliver these kind of...
Yeah, that's the latter, definitely. And I just think I've found it recently in interviewing for growth in our team. When I say our, sales and marketing, but in both. But going through that interview process and being fair to be recognizing exactly what you've just said, that growing a sales team is most probably meaning you're having new conversations, i.e. interviews with people who are in their sales career already and are most probably on some kind of commission scheme, because to your point, that's more evidence and proof that supports that the model that we use here is the minority. And I would say you're right, significant minority. But what's really nice, and actually I had a couple of people say this back to me in interviews, that when I told them about there is no individual commission structure in the sales team for salespeople, but we've got the value share scheme, which I framed exactly in the way that you have, but just giving the mechanic of it, a quarterly bonus is up for grabs. The best, as well as we can push the growth.
Paid quarterly
As well. Yeah. Don't have to wait annually. And it was met in a couple of different ways, but one person in particular, I think, but maybe both, said, "Oh, that's because you're a B Corp." And that connection was actually, if you unravel it, really, really nice. Because B Corps, when people who get B Corp or have read up on it, which I think people...
That's super interesting.
People in... I'm only realising this must only be the first time I've told you this. Told you that. Obviously, when you're a B Corp, or you know enough about B Corp, I think from the outside looking in, you might have heard of B Corp, but you don't know much about it. I think the autopilot is sustainability and planet, but actually, when you dig into it, you do some learning. That's one small facet to the whole thing. But people is the big centre pillar of like B Corp. You could almost bring everything back to like people, really.
That's super interesting. I think I've joked with Polly before that we were B Corp before we were B Corp.
But I think again, you lived through the process with Polly, but like again, from someone who's on the fringes of it, not within the application process, it felt like it was just a formalisation. The process was just a formalisation of what was already, I'm going to say in inverted commas, like in place, but maybe not in place, formalising it, bringing it together and just evidencing it rather than it being wholesale change.
Yeah, well, Polly did 98% of the work.
Top work.
And for me, that process was really gratifying from a validation standpoint at the steps that we were going through, because obviously it's tailored to the business, the assessment.
Yeah.
And a lot of what we were assessed on was around the people.
Yeah.
Largely. So, yeah, I found it really...
I just think it was really interesting, really quite, I get it. Like, it's validating feedback. It's, various different things. But when those couple of people in interviews said that, I was like, oh, shit, yeah. Like, I get where you're coming from. And yes, I agree. I can see why you think that. And I would actually agree. It's just another side to the B Corp thing, that there's integration between how we look after people and everyone benefits. And ultimately, I've spent a little bit of time recently thinking about this. More often than not, the opportunities that we grab hold of, put ourselves through the process for, and hopefully win at the end of, is more often than not a team effort, in particular at that mid to end stage of like pitching, let's say, obviously the name of this podcast, but the usual processes that we have to go through it's very, 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 very unlikely that me and maybe one other person here, so in other words, it's not resource intense, and we've talked about this so many times, haven't we, on the pitch process, the proposals process. It's a team effort.
Mm-hmm.
So why not see the benefit of that at the end, which could be a financial reward because everyone's benefiting. And a couple of people said that back to me as well. And ultimately, you know, it's that's quite evident in what we do. So I think personally, I just think it's a mechanic for bringing those things to life that just makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Personally. And I remember right back at the start, and we might have talked about this on a previous episode, right back at the start of when me and you first met, and we talked about that these sorts of things, driving the qualities that we want, driving the personal traits and qualities and investment, reasons for being invested in something. I feel like our structure really, really plays into that.
Yeah. Well, that's how it's been designed. Interesting.
That B Corp thing was just a really
cool.
nice clincher, isn't it?
Yeah, great. Really like that.
And that wasn't instigated by anything. They want a leading question. That it was, you know, genuine, fair conversation with people that you're interviewing in sales to get to commission and all that sort of stuff very early on, because it is fair. It's only fair on these people to know it, but doesn't really take much explaining or justifying in terms of like why we come at it the way we do. But to have it back, you know, fed back to you in, oh, it's B Corp, sort of related. That, I mean, that's, yeah, it was really good.
That's cool.
Really good to hear.
I mean, we could go on, but are there any other changes or things that have been rolled out early doors versus recently that you feel like are significant enough to talk about, or that you feel like have made an impact?
I mean, yeah, make an impact is, I can't speak for other people, but the individual centered approach to setting yourself goals.
Yeah.
So driven by the individual.
Yeah, the growth management side, that's a whole different podcast, isn't it? But
that to me is just flipping things into, again, this is only my take on it. Can't vouch for the nearly 40 other people here, but my take on it is when it's self-centered, and that's usually used in a negative term. I mean it when it's, you know, self-centered and again, another negative one, inflicted. For me personally, that works really well, because I have been the engineer of that right from the beginning, and the thought, you know, spending time planning these things and thinking about the goals that I want to achieve. And I think your way of supporting that and framing that has come on leaps and bounds for me personally, in terms of like what I want to ultimately achieve for today, for what it has as an impact for us and me as well.
I think just for context, then the difference obviously with the growth management side, moving from what I would class as a boilerplate PDP process, versus what we do now is really aimed at getting the individual to set themselves milestones. And the way that I communicate that is, if you ever leave Flaunt, which I always caveat with, don't ever leave Flaunt, what would you highlight about your time that you would be proud of? And that's kind of how I start that conversation and that process, and how everybody that manages people within the business frames it to the people that report into them.
Yeah.
And I think that's a difference. And going back to the benefits side, the benefits are designed to give people something or enhance people's well-being all day to day in some way. And it's the same as the growth management. It's genuine and it's personal, and it's designed to deliver.
Yeah.
It's not designed to just tick a box.
Yeah.
Of what we think people should be doing.
Yeah.
I think that's the difference.
But I think we could spend ages talking about how that is brought to light in other ways that's part of our day-to-day operating model. I'm thinking of, I mean, how we use surveys, Office Vibe, things like that. But also I don't want to dumb it down and say versus Office Vibe and sort of employee well-being and happiness surveys. I don't want it to reduce it down in any way, because actually what I'm about to say would contradict this, but we've put in place like Notion boards recently, and I think So basically, suggestion boards for anyone who don't know. Suggestion boards stick on whatever it is, big, small, medium, and obviously other people get to vote it to the top of the pile, and then it gets priority sort of looked at and ticked off. That's massive.
Well, it just gives people a voice, doesn't it?
That's it. And I'm not someone who gets involved much in things like that, but I can see for colleagues and teams that's really big. But it's just feeling valued with your voice and safe with your voice.
Safe's a nice word.
It's got to be, hasn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Really has to be.
Psychological safety is what we shoot for in every angle.
Yeah. And I think you said it right back at the start. I'm not going to give any specific examples that are beyond what I've already talked about. And again, can talk for days on many different aspects of benefits, etc. But confidence, the confidence we have today, I think, outwardly and inwardly, but outwardly in particular because of where I sit and what I do today versus 5 years ago when I joined. And this is me as part of this confidence. It's just leaps and bounds compared.
Well, with that very media trained link, that can lead us into the summary of where we were confidence wise and where we were in our mindset and approach sub 10 people was we're capable of delivering strategies that a 100-person agency can deliver.
Yeah.
And the way that I frame it is acting bigger than you are. Your perspective is important here because for the majority of your time, you're public facing.
Yeah.
Where, based on everything we've just discussed around the operational side, the cultural side of the business, at 9 versus 40, when we were acting big, now we're getting to the stage where we're sort of straying into that certainly medium-sized agency territory. How do you feel in terms of the difference? Or do you feel like there isn't none, but now we're in a position to actually substantiate what we're saying?
Yeah, substantiate it, but yeah, I wouldn't use that to frame how we were before as being anything in comparison negative to where we can stand on our own 2 feet type mindset today versus 5 years ago. I don't think there's been, as much as we've talked about quite significant changes there, I wouldn't say there's been wholesale change in anything but headcount and like comms from externally is my sort of gut feeling on it. It's always interesting to sit and speak to either new starters, and I remember asking Demi when she joined the marketing team when we went out for a welcome lunch with her. That's something else we do. How do we look from the outside the outside looking in? And it was really nice. She was coming at it from a different, I would say a more biased angle, but it's really nice exercise to ask people that, and Priya have done the same when she's joined my team. How do we look from the outside looking in? I'd love to ask those same people 5 years ago, because I think that's a really good test as well. Because I'm obviously obsessed with the public, exactly because of where my role sits as well. I'm more obsessed with, or should I say, I obsess more over things like how the public are seeing us and thinking like that. That'd be a really good exercise to see. And before you and I met for the first time, I don't know if I knew anything about Flaunt. And I reckon well, you would.
There was a reason for that.
You would foresee me saying that, yeah.
Yeah, so that was purposeful. I had a conversation with Polly about this, we almost operated under the radar or in stealth mode, or however you want to describe it, for, I would say, at the very least, the first 2 years were spent purposefully not being loud, because... Yeah. And it's funny, I was having a conversation and I got asked the question the other day, like, what kind of clients are you working with? Do you have any small clients anymore? And my response was, well, one of our first clients that paid us a bill was the New York Times. So, in terms of scale, we were working with
already there.
enterprise level clients from very, very early on, due to the fact that me and the board had connections that could get us through the door, and we then had the capability to deliver beyond expectations. And that strategy of staying under the radar had impact at that point. So the perception, I think, accelerated a lot quicker because we'd been operating silently for probably 3 years.
Yeah.
And then it was getting to the point where people were like, Flaunt, who are these Flaunt that I keep hearing about? And we'd not done it.
Yeah.
And now we're like active. But
that
is interesting.
It's
so there wasn't a mindset shift, nor was there front of us acting big. It was just I guess, without sounding douchey, a vision of what we were capable of that's carried through.
Yeah. It's cumulative growth as well, isn't it?
Compound interest in culture.
Yeah.
Ooh.
Fucking hell.
Put that on a bumper sticker.
Fucking hell. And you'll be rammed into.
Yeah. Right.
Good.
Thank you.
Thank you.